Okay, so it talks about the FHA, the Federal Housing Administration, and it talks about how they were basically redlining when they first started, and they explain what redlining is, and then they talk about like the things that they did. For Bloomberg, Bloomberg is a data company that is based in New York, and I use their data to talk about the percentage of African Americans who, I'm sorry, who experience mortgage denial. So it gives the percentages for African Americans, whites, and non-Hispanics. And it basically like just does exactly that. It gives the percentages for those who have experienced mortgage denial. The BBC is a news journalist company, and they basically had an interview or an encounter with Oprah Winfrey, and Oprah is talking about the discrimination and the racism that she faced in Switzerland. So that is how that is more of a that is how that is a credible source, because that is coming directly from the person that I needed the information to come from. And then the school paper is a credible source, and I used it to basically, I used it as a quote to tie together my paper, and I used it as a call to action type of thing. Okay, so what are my main points? My main points are the successful people who still had to encounter something. I used one specific person, Oprah Winfrey. And my next point was redlining, which I explained is the process of redlining is the process of lowering a loan or giving no loan to people who lived in African American society or who lived close to an African American society. That was another one of my main points. And then another one of my main points was the prison system being modern day slavery. Basically, just to explain that prison, jail, all of that was literally created for the purpose of the 13th Amendment, which is there should be no slavery unless in the prison system. So when you enter the prison system and when you are put into jail or anything of the sort, they can literally use you as a slave. That is what you are there for. As a prisoner, you are a slave. And then another point that I used was gerrymandering, which is basically the process of moving a community line or, okay, for an example, we have Gwinnett and Rockdale, or Gwinnett and DeKalb. We have Gwinnett and DeKalb. Say if there was a small community in between Gwinnett and DeKalb before it was just that, and in that community, it was a community full of Democrats, like the main voting and the main percentage was Democrats. Somebody could draw the community line in between or like basically to split up that community to decrease the number of Democrats and put them in two areas that are more Republican, so that the Democratic nominees could not get as many votes and the percentages could not be as high in comparison to the Republicans. My main points support my argument because, one, everything that I just said was used as tactics to stop African Americans from having a voice and from completely integrating into a society. So, for example, the prison system. When slaves first got freed, many officers would go out and just, if the slaves were literally walking home, they would accuse these slaves of doing something and they would take them to jail to keep them in the process of slavery. So since it was now illegal to like actually have slaves and to keep them on a plantation, they would use the convict leasing program to send them to different railroad companies, to send them to different farmers, just to use that. Another thing was sharecropping. Sharecropping was the process of you're on a plantation, you're working for me, but you get paid extremely little, or in exchange for you doing this, I give you a place to live. So it was the same thing as slavery, just in different terms. Another point that supports my argument was the successful people going through something, which was really more of a counter argument. So I'm going to come back to that. Redlining was used to keep Black Americans from integrating into a society. This was more In the 1930s, really, when African Americans really started to be on an upkeep and many African Americans started to flourish in communities, but they wanted to buy houses. They were stopped. They could not integrate into the societies of buying houses, and they were kept in very low income and very poor areas, which is where a lot of African Americans reside now. Yeah, that's how that one ties into my argument. And even gerrymandering, people use gerrymandering to stop African Americans from voting. Like, another thing that I had used in my argument was the KKK. The KKK used to lynch black people on the way to the sites. Many black codes were used where if you wanted to vote, you had to be able to read. You had to take a reading test, a literacy test. Like, there was different things that you had to encounter just to be able to vote. And even though we do not have the extreme circumstances of that to this day, we still do encounter things of that nature. Not to the counter argument. My counter argument was successful people. There are many successful black people, but they still encounter different things. The counter argument that I had used, I'm going to quote it directly for you, was, there are many African Americans who are successful now. Oprah, Kanye West, and President Obama are just some examples. My answer to that is they had to fight their way to the top. For example, Oprah Winfrey. Oprah was born into poverty to a single teenage mom. She was molested as a child, and she was she really had nothing. She came from nothing and rose to the top. She was maybe one in a million for circumstances like that. My numbers are not exactly correct. Don't quote me on that, okay? But she was a beacon of hope for people who experienced the same things as she did. Many African American women don't have light shed on them in circumstances like this. Many African women are degraded when they speak up against abusers, molesters, anything like that. They are not believed. So Oprah Winfrey still had to encounter the everyday issues of many people, even though that she is successful and rich. And even as she is successful and rich, she is still encountering the processes of racism. To go to Switzerland, she has all of this money. Oprah Winfrey is very known. She has her Oprah Winfrey show. She was offered that. Like, everybody knows who Oprah Winfrey is. Like, everybody knows who she is. Yet she still had the encounter of racism on a vacation that she took. Like, this is something that black people will never get over. No matter how much money you have, no matter how much fame you have, no matter what you've done for the world, you will still always encounter. Another person that I use, Chuck Berry and Elvis Presley. Chuck Berry did the exact same thing that Elvis Presley did, but he did it first. The only difference between the two was Chuck Berry was black and Elvis Presley was white. Although Elvis Presley was identified to the older generations as a troublemaker, as someone who rebelled, like everything like that, he still had light shed on him. He still had the opportunity to become bigger. Meanwhile, Chuck Berry, not a lot of people know who he is. Not a lot of people would hear Chuck Berry's song and say, oh, is Chuck Berry? But in comparison to Elvis Presley, many people know who he is. This makes me still right because it still shows that even though these people were successful, even though these people reached the top of the tops, even though these people were billionaires, even though these people are very well known, they still are encountering the problems that everybody else is. Why should you believe me? What makes my argument interesting? My argument is interesting, one, because I would like to say that this is something that anybody could go through. This is something that any African American could go through. More than less, if you're looking at it from a perspective, from a white person's perspective, if you get pulled over, you don't have to worry about, oh, are they going to kill me? Will they pull a gun on me? Can I make any sudden movements? You can reach over into your glove box safely and pull out your insurance information. Whereas a black person has to keep their hands on the steering wheel. They can't make any sudden movements. They have to watch their surroundings. They don't want to pull over into a small, quiet area where there's no one around because who knows what could happen to them. This is something that many people experience. And this is something that not until the Black Lives Matter movement, when I was just in 7th grade, that many people did not pay attention to. George Floyd was one of the people who were unfortunately had to be an example for the African American community and just for the world to see. Even though the Black Lives Matter movement was something that happened ahead of time and it was something that was previously there, it was not something that a lot of people shed light to. Just looking at our jail systems, just looking at the things that our ancestors had to go through, just listening to our national anthem, the home of the brave, the land of the free, like the Pledge of Allegiance. This is the place where ultimate freedom is supposed to be had. This is the place that is against all things autocracy. All things autocracy. They are against everything that does not represent freedom. We all have freedom of speech, freedom of religion. We have freedom of everything, yet African Americans are still confined to the white people's freedom. We are still confined to the lines of, you can't do this because this is too much. African Americans are still in the shambles of slavery that our country was built on. At the end of the day, African Americans will truly never be able to integrate into a community that was built on the backs of our ancestors in shackles. We were brought here for a reason, and that was to work for other people. That was to be forced to do things for other people. They found a way through that. Our Constitution literally was built, the 13th Amendment was built on shackles to African Americans. That is the whole reason that whole process was added into our Constitution. Many African Americans are still facing this discrimination to this day. Many African Americans have to worry about whether or not their brothers, their sons, if anybody will make it home. Many African Americans cannot go through the window of their house when they leave their key, even though they ask the neighbor for help, because they will get shot. Many African Americans cannot walk with a hood on their head because they will face the discrimination of a white police officer. Thank you.